Oh, hello there. Yes, the newspaper says, say it's true. We can break through. Though torn in two, we can be one. Yes, definitely my favourite New Year's song. Has been since, well, it came out, I believe, 83, yes. Like stuff from the first two U2 albums, because after all, there's no point in being a fool about it. Yes. Anyway, do have a lovely New Year's Day if you can do. Today I was going to do some stuff about some sort of intriguing sort of direction of travel of right-wing grifters generally, but yesterday I was appalled at what I saw on the Andre Walker show, and just I think this little video clip, which I want to unpack in a lot of ways, I think just really does show the appalling nature of the right-wing propaganda, nasty, racist right-wing propaganda that we are being fed on a very regular basis. You can see it all here, okay? I mean, just a group of people who have no qualifications to be talking about what they are, who are allowed a platform to just spew out lies, basically, lies, and nasty right-wing talking points, if I can put it as gently as that. Just really nasty stuff, which 20 or 30 years ago would have been absolute fringe of British politics in terms of National Front or BNP, and yet here it is, centre stage. So anyway, let's dive into this short video, but I'll stop at various point times to make a variety of points. Obviously, you know the form by now. Yes, well, we start with Andre Walker, a man who's invested in a wardrobe. Good to see a nice shirt, although I'm not too sure about that waistcoat. And he has a new sidekick who, if I wanted to be really rude about her, I could be, but I'm going to resist the temptation because it will make me sound quite sexist. So we're going to move on and just see what they have to say.
People who hate this country, who oppose what we are doing and who want the country to change, and they're out in force on our streets.
Anyway, just that little section there, we have the nub of it, don't we? Yes, there's a whole bunch of brown people here, and you need to be afraid of them, because we'll show you clip after clip after clip after clip of brown people on the streets of London doing things that we think are very, very bad and they shouldn't be doing, and you need to be scared of them. But they hate us, okay? They hate us. Notice the framing there, okay? There's us, nice people, and them, people we show you clips of. Important, that.
Rafe Heydel-Mankoo is an award-winning historian, author and broadcaster specialising in British national identity, the Anglosphere and culture wars.
Yes, indeed. Award-winning, yes. I wonder what his awards are, yes. I always love this, that he's introduced as a historian. I can find absolutely no evidence of Rafe being a historian. It's a self-appointed title. He appears not to know anything about history. He will often pontificate at length about factual history, and yet, as we will see slightly further in, he really doesn't know what he's talking about. Except, of course, he does, because it's all about an agenda. His history is a particular one that needs to fit a particular right-wing replacement theory as sort of talking point. Let's move on with that. Historian.
Oh, Rafe, you sound like my sort of person. So look, why don't you tell us what you think is currently going on in this country and why we're going wrong?
Yes, all right. Well, you're quite right at the beginning there to draw the distinction between immigration and mass migration. I mean, what we had in the 80s and 90s was perfectly fine. We had about 50,000 people coming over here net, which was as perfectly fine for our needs, and also we were able to assimilate and adjust people into our society quite easily. And then back in the 80s and 90s, of course, we weren't obsessed by race. You know.
Right, okay, yeah, just to dive in there. Yes, I mean, this is kind of like the latest thing, because the government is in so much trouble in and around its migration policies and has very much dug its own hole. We now have the talking point that there are just too many people. Nobody can ever actually put a number on how many people is too many, because realistically what they mean is zero. That's the issue here. But he is going to do the sort of classic Nigel Farage thing of painting this picture of the past from the 80s, when most of the audience is sort of dimly about what they can remember, if you like, for a lot of them, as being these halcyon days that were marvellous in and around. What was going on with people. But I mean, that framing of that that time framing is very, very important, because it lands the problem neatly at the nasty lefties who are doing it deliberately. Anyway, let's see just how brilliant those days were, shall we?
We had Daley Thompson and Tessa Sanderson in the Olympics, Linford Christie, Kenny Lynch. No one thought of those people as being anything other than British. But what's happened is mass immigration has made us all now, along with the long march through the institutions and the woke revolution ushered in by Tony Blair, has made us far more sensitive to race. And
Right, okay then, yes, there we go, you see. Yes, back in the 80s, all of those black people were absolutely fine, and there was no racism then at all. And then Tony Blair came along and made it all bad, because Tony Blair, being the out there Maoist, wokist, communist, Gramsci, you name it, it's all his bleeding fault, wasn't it? Yes, of course, it was all his fault that these things happened. It wasn't Mrs. Thatcher signing the Maastricht Treaty, which basically led us down that particular road. No, we can locate it exactly, and not even in the 80s. In the 80s, it was just a halcyon time when there were no problems around the BNP or the National Front or anyone else. Definitely not. And, Daley Thompson was a very, very happy man, and Kenny Lynch never ever mentioned anything about race at all. Linford Christie never mentioned a word about race whatsoever. And then suddenly what happened was that a whole bunch of people, the Long March for the Institutions, nice nod there to Douglas Murray, of course, this plot is a plot by the lefties to get loads of brown people here so that they can win. You can see how well that's worked in the last 15 years. But anyway, let's just move on.
Of course, the reaction to such large-scale mass immigration is a rising intolerance amongst the indigenous population.
I've noticed that when I grew up, race wasn't the number one issue. It now really is the number one issue in this country. I mean, I have to say.
Yes, and again, this is something that the vast majority of the British media will push, that race is the number one issue. It really isn't. Latest opinion polls once again are showing that race is, although it's high up on the list amongst voters generally, it's not there at number one, is it? Because we can't talk about the number one issue, because then it might be problematic for the people that own the station at GB News if they had to do things like, I don't know, pay more tax. So we're not going to talk about the number one issue. We're going to talk about other things. So the reason why the NHS is underfunded and you can't get a doctor's appointment is because of Tony Blair. I think you need to bear that in mind.
It frustrates me enormously that racial tensions that didn't exist in the past are now being created, and I would argue stoked up by the political left, who want people to come to this country, or lots of people to come to this country, in order to denigrate our society.
Yeah. Yes, there we go, you see. It's not just that people want to come here and work and make a life for themselves, but they want to come here and denigrate us, yes, okay? They might look, those cons down the street might look okay to you, but really they're plotting against you, because whenever you're not looking at them, they're on the phone to Tony Blair and his other communist mates who are stoking up trouble. And you want to bolt your door, because otherwise they'll come around with a machete. Probably.
Well, that's the crux of the issue, actually, and that's the reason why mass immigration first started in Britain. When Tony Blair got that victory in 1997, they thought to themselves, well, the Tories are the natural party of government.
Yeah.
We probably only have 2 terms in office in which we can actually implement the radical reform and change that we need to ensure that we have Labour governments in the future.
And change the demographics forever.
And one of the ways we're going to do that is, as Peter Mandelson said, was to send out search parties to bring migrants to Britain, because ethnic minorities vote 80% for the Labour Party. So by allowing mass immigration into Britain, the plan was that over the coming decades, you would have a huge demographic voting for Labour.
Yes, there you have it. You see, it's exactly the same as what they say in the States, isn't it? It's Republican Party. Yes, they're getting loads of people to come in through the southern border because that way you'll be replaced demographically, and they have more kids than you. Great replacement. Except, of course, the problem with this is that it's just right-wing cant. And more than that, Rafe, okay, more than that, it is simply a very nasty, extremely right-wing, fascistic notion of the great replacement theory. It's very, very nasty. And although they don't say so here, effectively, historically, because I know my history, unlike Rafe, this is associated with people with big noses. Now, they can't obviously say this here because the framing recently has been about Judeo-Christian culture. But if we went back 50 years and Rafe was pontificating this stuff, people would tell him very exactly who was behind it because they're the ones who are always behind it because it's always the same thing. Yes? The Israeli government likes to talk about blood libel, but effectively here's Rafe doing the same thing. That's what he's saying. Yeah? They, them. It's their fault. Yeah? Jeez. Let's finish.
And if you look at cities like London and in the north, for example, the policy has worked because
what I don't understand. What I don't understand, Rafe, is we live in a country now where, you know, look, it's not apartheid, but there is no doubt that it is accepted and tolerated to be racist against white people in a way that's not racist. And if you talk to somebody like Lee Jasper, and I advise you not to, but if you talk to somebody like Lee Jasper, what he will say.
Right, okay, yeah, and we'll just finish at that point. But there you have it, you see. Yeah, yeah, you, us, the white folk, who for some bizarre reason, idiot in a bow tie gets included in that particular group, are the ones who are suffering here. Right, okay, yeah. So where will the fault lie? Well, the fault will lie with those brown people. Of course it does. And again, this is GB News personified. Yeah, yeah. We can't talk about all of these things that are actually important in your life. But what we can do is get you to blame brown people for your failures, or indeed the failures of the government in the last 15 years. And it is very, very nasty stuff. And you can see how quickly that this will switch into the talking points in the upcoming American presidential race. They're exactly the same. This is basically what Donald Trump is saying. And these are also the people that will persuade you that what Donald Trump is saying is perfectly reasonable. It isn't. It's a nasty, fascistic trope, and it needs to be called out on a very regular basis. But it's GB News, and it won't be. Certainly not in these kind of late night slots when people are just allowed on. People with no qualifications, like Rafe whatsoever, no qualifications whatsoever to be pontificating about this. And I'm sorry, Rafe, mate, but looking at your DNA, it's a bit dodgy coming from you. Anyway, do have a lovely New Year's Day.